Eagle Gold CEO, Tony Moreau. Tony, it's a pleasure to speak to you today. I feel like we just spoke 3 weeks ago in our Christmas conversation that was not really about American Eagle. Um, American Eagle put out news just a couple days ago, literally 2 days ago, holes 31 and 35, and 37 and 38. The market response has been swift and sharp, selling the shares. Let's start with the hard questions. Um, Tony, how does it feel to be called a used car salesman?
It's pretty interesting. Never seen a used car that cost $29 million, which we got from South32. Also, maybe a used car salesman in the fact that if this thing comes to fruition, we'll be producing copper that brand new cars eventually turn into used cars that people will be selling. But look, people can say whatever they want. I think the big thing is we have a lot of positive takeaways here. We got a big cash balance. We're looking forward to the future. And I think it's just a bunch of pseudonyms online being armchair CEOs. But like, this as well as anyone. I'm one of the most successful CEOs out there. So if you have a problem, you got questions, I'll give you answers. I'm easy to access through CEO, through my email. There's tons of way to find me, and I answer every call from any investor. So if you really got a gripe, then feel free to contact me anytime.
Yeah, there's definitely some frustration out there. Let's dig into the. I think hole 31 is a great result, and we can talk about that more in a bit. But let's talk about the pivot to the north. I mean, there was a clear pivot in Q4 with the company changing the presentation. There were a couple of pieces of news you put out with some quotes saying you're confident in a high grade source in the north zone. What was your interpretation of the results that you received from the four north zone holes, and did they meet your expectations?
Yeah, like 35 and 38 are probably the north zone holes you were describing. 33 was pretty great hole, a nice 50 meters at 1% with high grade copper. 37 went into the porphyry stock. We didn't really have much expectations from that off the beginning, but look, we're drilling not just to hit good results. Obviously, you want to do that every time, but you're bound to miss sometimes, and sometimes hitting those long holes of 0.2%, they give you a lot of information that you wouldn't otherwise have that can help you angulate your drill holes in the future. But 35 and 38. Look, we just gave the public the same information that we had. Those visuals were extremely exciting. They were great. They were it's what South32 saw when they went on site, and we just wanted to give the public that information. So we didn't show core photos online, but we did do some technical presentations, and in those technical presentations we showed the core photos. We always qualified it that these are visuals and we have no clue what the grade is. And I think there's a little bit of I think people get a little blurry in terms of what actually happened, but people take pictures of those core, then online they start saying it's 1 to 2%. We weren't sure what it was, so we're not going to go out there and say, hey, it's not 2%. We weren't sure, but if anyone called my phone and asked, I really kind of emphasize, hold up, these are just visuals, let's see what happens. But they look great. So when those holes came out and we saw them, we didn't actually know what they're going to be till the end of December, when we were on break. Look, they were a little disappointing in the fact that I knew that the public probably thought that they're going to be a lot higher grade holes. The big takeaway is we had a long stretch of disseminated mineralization, 35, for example, 500 meters of over 0.3 of just copper equivalent around 0.45. That was a big positive through a massive hole that showed a lot of scale. Now 38, again, everyone wants these big long holes, but 38 came from a different direction. And albeit it wasn't a booming hole, the part where we thought we'd hit, the area that 35 hit, it did hit. So at a very similar grade, the 150 meter stretch that we hit 35. What people have to realize about that northern area is those were the first holes that pretty much anyone has ever drilled there. So it's a new discovery in itself. And we still don't understand the ore body. We thought it was tabular. It looks like it's more plutonic. And we only have 2 pierce points in there. We weren't even able to do a 3rd pierce point because we had to leave the property just because camp closed down. So the big thing for next year, which I wish we did it this year, which we didn't have time, is just get that 3rd pierce point in there. Once you have that 3rd pierce point, you can start to figure out how that ore body is directed, how big it is, etc. So coming out of 2025 program, that's gonna be probably our first hole, and we'll come out swinging. But obviously, you as a CEO, you do what's best for the company and the shareholders long term. But it's vicious out there, and anyone that's investing in penny stocks should be used or expect these things to have wild rides, up and down. And American Eagle is certainly an example of that. We started off at 20 cents, we went public, went to 30, went down to 2, went to 40, back to 8, then to 60, then to 20, and to $1. So the good thing is, we're starting at a higher base each time we have these swings. And even though there's about 5.5 million shares traded, they went into good hands. And I think to understand some of these swings, you got to, almost take a degree in psychology. Because I think what people are looking at, let's be honest, the general markets are doing really well. So in order for people to take the risk in a lot of these stocks, people are coming at these junior stocks that don't really have an idea of what they're looking at. And, they want to get rich quick. So they're looking for these 5Xs. They start hearing the noise out there. They're following the volume, and they invest. And the moment they don't see that 5X right away, they're out, and they're going to look for the next thing. And then you have a lot of these other investors that are looking at this. And I get called from technical guys, geologists, stuff. We don't really understand why it's going down as much. It's this is really undervalued. And I think the thing is, forget the technical guys. You got a lot of other guys that are in the junior space, and they don't understand. But what they see is they see red on the screen, and it creates some contagion. It creates some panic, and the downwards pressure is a lot heavier than it otherwise should be. And part of that's because of our rise so quickly when we went from 40 cents in September to $1.07 top tick in December. So you get this sell off, and it's also kind of a perfect storm because we're clearing all of our warrants. We're going to be warrant free next week. So at the same time, we got this selling pressure coming in from the warrants. But all in all, we're in a really good place. If you look at us year over year, I think the stock's still up 25%. We have a second major company on our registry, and we have $37 million. And I've said this many times. This is not a stock to trade. You're gonna lose your shirt both ways. But I think for a stock, it's a really good stock to hold long term, and we can finally actually drill and focus on long term with that treasury. So I think for long term shareholders to be happy right now, it's like Boxing Day. These shares are on sale. We're seeing a pretty stable price, but obviously there's a lot of upset people, that see losses in their bank account. But we're looking forward to the future. We're going to rebuild, and American Eagle is resilient, and you're even more resilient with that much money in the bank. And if you look around any other BC projects, tell me a project that's more drill ready, that has the cash that we do. I think companies would kill A, to have our property, and B, to have the balance sheet that we have. So we have a lot of positives here. And, it sucks ego-wise. I have friends, family that's invested in the stock. They're obviously down, but you only lose it if you sell. And I think it's a good price right now, forward-looking statement. And I think long-term, we're in a really good position. And the stock price really matters if you're going to raise money, which we don't have to do for a minimum 2 years. And then the stock price really matters when you actually do a liquidity event. And if we have what we have, we're going to find it. And, we're going to build that stock up. So if and when we do sell to some company, it'll be a lot higher price, but it's going to take time. It's not going to be an overnight success, get rich, project, but, we have the goods there, and we have a lot more information than we've ever had. We're going to drill more holes this year than we drilled in the previous 3 years combined. That got us to the 140 million valuation.
Yeah, I mean, some good points made there. A couple I want to focus on, and that is the long term. So when you think back to where the company was in 2022 and where it is today, that's a pretty good uptrend in a lot of ways in terms of the share price, the market cap, the cash in the treasury, the results from the drilling. But But, and this is a big one, it's 2025, and it's what have you done for me lately market. And investors who bought this in the last couple of months are obviously not pleased, right? And so you have to deal with that to some extent. Do you feel like if you could do it again, go back a couple months around the time of the South32 deal, would you do anything a bit different in terms of the way you set expectations, some of the signaling about the North Zone, et cetera, et cetera?
Honestly, like I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't. Um, we gave the market the same information we had. We thought those holes would probably be higher than they were. They're still good, but we thought they'd be higher than they were. And it's just a perfect storm. Like, when we started coming up with those pictures, South 32 was there. We started getting an inkling that they were going to buy. So, we're giving the public the same information. And guess what? Our stock went from 45 cents to, I think, 78 or 81 when we did the South 32 deal. So our stock going up actually got us, over $10 million more in our treasury, which gives us an extra season of drilling, which gives us an extra season where we don't have to raise. So in the long term for investors, that's a good thing. And doing a raise at 87.5 cents, like we almost top ticked the market on there. So hats off to our team for doing that. I think one thing I would probably do different, I'd probably release 31 at a different time. I think the problem with putting out 35 and 33 and 38 is that 31 really got overshadowed. So, if you put 31 on by its own, you get another bump in the stock price, and maybe, the violence in that downward swing isn't as much. But, there was no time to really kind of highlight to the market that, these visuals weren't as good as I guess people anticipated them to be, because quite frankly, we didn't get them until the end of December. And, what are we supposed to do? Just start telling people that they're not good? So we always emphasize that these are visuals. We don't know the grade, which we didn't. And look, just build from there.
Yeah, I mean, looking at holes 33 and 35, the results are quite good and match up well to almost any other porphyry project in BC. 37, 38, definitely a little bit light, but 33 and 35 are very good. So 2 out of 4 into the not well understood North Zone. It's not bad. I mean, in the junior exploration business, it's not bad. It's
Look,
just that people had really high expectations. When you talk about bornite and chalcocite a lot, it definitely raises up the grade expectations. What are your conversations with South 32, and do you have any idea what their take is on the results?
look, South 32 didn't invest in us for, results in hand. I think they saw a good enough indication from our 3 years of drilling that we have something here. They certainly like the core that they saw in 35 and 38, albeit not, ball crushing grades like I think people expected, but they're in here for the long term. So they're in here hoping that we can define something, de-risk something that will eventually be in mine and take us out and, build a relationship with this. That's why they take an equity stake when Tech already has an equity stake. They have access to our data, etc. I talked to Tech, I talked to South 32, both of them said, great results. South 32 obviously same as us, same as investors, probably thought those are going to be a little bit higher than they are. We did some, laser analysis on that core, and it showed a lot of that bornite and chalcocite rimming, which gave us, those expectations, which we, conveyed to the market. So if we weren't doing that deal, etc., we wouldn't have to do a raise. Probably would have been a little bit more conservative. But it was an effort to raise money, and we really were giving people a lot more transparency than I think most companies give, which is good and bad. People always want transparency. Rob, before we were putting out like that video, people were begging for core photos. Put more core photos out. Put more core photos out. And we've seen with Aston Bay and Decade, it never really works. And even with us, it stung us before. So, we kind of went in between. We gave a technical video, a couple of them. We showed them in the video, but we never put them on our website. And as for the grade, that's sometimes how it shakes out. You see this bornite and chalcocite, but you're not sure how much of that is actually, has copper in it. So, yeah, look, I feel for some of these guys that the stock's down, but a lot of that is traders. A lot of these guys exercising their warrants, and I think this is going to be a short-term effect.
Okay. Um, Is that you, Neil, on the other account, or who is that? No.
Yeah, sorry, I got to unmute myself. Yeah, no, it's Neil sitting here.
Okay. Hey, Neil, how you doing?
Good.
So the bornite with the chalcocite, rimming, that was definitely something that caught my attention. It's a slide in the presentation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and what did the assays tell you about the interpretation of the bornite, with the chalcocite rimming?
Well, yeah, I'll kind of go through why at the moment on the ground when we were pulling the core out, we were so excited and why it kind of resulted in that more pivot to the north. And then touch on, what the core looked like and then what the results ultimately tell us. NAC is a complicated system. And as we've drilled throughout this southwestern flank of the main porphyry stock, we've continuously encountered these narrow dikes, which we've talked about before, these copper dikes, these monzonitic composition dikes with chalcocite and bornite disseminations. And it's a very exciting mineralization style to see. And up until this point, I think the longest intercept of drilling down one of these features is about 40 meters, which is still really good, but usually they're on the scale of 5 to 10 meters. And so when we were drilling 35, we encountered this much broader intercept of intrusive with a similar style of mineralization. This bornite with what looked like chalcocite and kind of grading in and out of bornite to chalcopyrite. And so part of the thinking was, okay, have we found the source for these monzonitic intrusions? It turns out after getting the geochemistry back, these are an entirely unique beast to themselves. They're not the same composition. They're quite a distinct geochemical grouping of different immobile elements. So it actually shows a different affinity to the other very similarly mineralized dikes we've encountered. And so to my mind, this is a positive, right? Regardless of what the grade comes back, is we know there's copper, there's bornite and chalcocite. It's a pretty high tenor of copper sulfide assemblage. And some of it came back quite strong. The upper part in 35 was averaging 0.4 copper, 0.4% copper with just under 0.1 grams per ton gold. And the lower intercept was around 0.22 copper, which is a little bit lower. But the gold was a bit higher, about 0.21 grams per ton gold. And these are very long, continuous stretches of mineralized intrusive, which we have not seen in NAC so far. So to Tony's point, this is a new, much deeper zone, much more continually mineralized zone than had ever been encountered at NAC before. And that's after, this is at the end of 3 seasons of drilling. So to continue hitting new finds like this is really exciting. And I think it bodes really well for a much more expanded program. We've still only drilled a very small percentage of the prospective ground on the property. So yeah, it obviously is, if you show me a geologist, I'll show you somebody who at some point in their career is being disappointed by visuals. I'm disappointed by the overall grade. It was not as high as I would have liked to see, especially considering the presence of those high tenor copper sulfides. But at the same time, they're not bad. If you just showed up to this property and drilled that, you would be thrilled. This is, it's pretty spectacularly mineralized rock still. We'll have some samples that have been Roundup. If you're by, you can see why, any geologist would be excited about these. The problem with it is it's texturally, it's a pretty interesting looking rock. There's not a ton of mafics left. And it looks like those mafic mineral sites have been the points of where the nucleation for the copper sulfides took place. And it's tough to visually estimate when it's that fine how much of it is mafic mineral and how much of it has been replaced by the copper sulfide. And so if you looked at the entire ratio of dark to light, you get a much higher modal percentage than if you're looking specifically for those copper sulfides, which is You know, it's a tough thing to visually estimate. And when it's disseminated like that, it's a tough thing to even estimate in PXRF, because if you have an XRF over one of the sulfide grains, it blasts over 1% copper. And if you don't hit a sulfide grain, it's nothing. So it's a tough mental math to do. And yeah, all you can do in that case is wait for the assays. You know, it shows copper, like it's clearly mineralized. Mineralized as much as, you know, I think any geo on the project would have liked. No, unfortunately, but I think it does point to a lot of potential to the north, to the northeast, and elsewhere throughout the porphyry stock, because we know it's a later phase of a separate intrusion that comes in and cuts the main body of Babine porphyry stock.
Yeah, you know, I recall, I think we spoke, was it November at some point, and you definitely emphasized multiple times in the conversation that we need to get the assays. You know, we need to see the assays. It's encouraging, but we need to see the assays. And I think that's a good lesson that I've learned probably 28 times and learn it for the 29th time. The visuals tell a story, but it may not be the perfectly right and perfectly accurate story. And even with the XRF, you're just getting a few hits on 3D volume that you're not able to fully grasp. So the only way to fully understand the full volume copper content or gold content of the ore body is through the assays, and a lot of assays. So yeah, the core, you know, the core for 35, the pictures on the website are really very good looking. I mean, some of these intervals look fantastic. You know, I feel like I would have been kind of fooled too. So there was a pivot to the north, obviously in Q4, and is that still your focus in 2025? Is that the company's main focus for the 2025 program, you know, at NAC?
We got 3
I
rigs.
mean,
You go ahead, Neil.
yeah, go ahead, Tony.
No, you go, Neil.
No, it's going to be one of 3 main focus areas. There's still a lot of potential in that main drilled zone. Our last infill hole, hole 34, hit a pretty unexpected body of what looks to be, and geochemically is somewhat similar to Babine porphyry stock rock. But then immediately below that, we started to hit the same kind of massive bornite anhydrite veining we hit in 17 and 31, which is quite a ways to the south, within a bunch of really nicely disseminated rocks. So there's actually a really nice high grade zone just below the intrusive in 34, and there's still room to expand that as well. So there's going to be some shallower infill drilling in there to properly define that volume. And then there's also going to be a push to the southeast and to the northeast with systematic, regularly spaced drill strings and then fences along those strings to try and help us understand the geometry. We know there's mineralization in both of those zones. The more we drill at NAC, the more focused zones of higher grade we intercept. So within this broader cloud of anomalous copper smoke and gold smoke, we know that there are higher grade zones, and we see inklings that some of these, you know, we might be hitting much larger bodies of this rock. The stuff that we hit in 35 and 38 is a good example of that, right? We know that variation within that intrusive, there can be some really high grade zones in it. The one higher up in 35 was really, really strong copper grade. And you hit a big enough volume of that, and you've got something very easily extractable and economic, high tenor of sulfide, and in a large volume. And so that's what the focus is going to be. So stepping to the northeast, stepping to the southeast, and continuing to work within our main zone. And then we also have the budget to do some bolder step outs as well once we get a bit better handle on the broader structure with geophysics and some more boots on the ground out in those further afield sites.
Tony?
Yeah, look, Neil covered it there. So I think he covered everything. 30,000 meters. We're gonna drill. I think the big thing that Neil mentioned, there are a couple drill holes. If you look at that blue sky donut, I know people are grilling me for not using geology terms, but these are marketing terms you'll remember. There are a couple drill holes there that had some really nice grade in them, and they weren't very deep. And you combine that with some of the geophysics that we're going to do in the off season that, Neil, feel free to touch on. We want to show, a nice 1,000-meter step out that we can, make the Tom Woolrich's and koalas of the world proud and show that this thing has, hate to use this word, but world-class scale. But we've only explored about 20% of our property. We have a lot more to go. And our focus is going to be on drilling.
Neil, so the new northern intrusive, let's call it, an arrangement. This thing that has been tagged in holes 35, 37, etc. It definitely shows some promise. There's no question about that. But it's also clear that if it has a heart, you probably haven't tagged into it yet. What is your current interpretation on where the source is? Is it to the northeast? Is that sort of something that has to be tested? You have to step to the northeast to try to get a better handle on how this thing is shaped?
I mean, at this point, it's tough to say with any 100% certainty. Geochemically, it is very distinct from the Babine Porphyry stock, and it's very distinct from the other copper dikes we've intersected. Elsewhere on the property where we've drilled, we know there's a pretty close association between the presence of these copper-bearing dikes and disseminated and vein-hosted mineralization around those zones. Down deep, further to the north, I was really encouraged by the frequency of bornite and chalcopyrite veins within the Babine Porphyry stock. That's specifically in hole 33. And 33 cut a bit deeper. 37 was still hitting similar host rock and still hitting bornite and chalcopyrite veins, but in a lower abundance. The thing about 37 was that it was drilled at a minus 55 dip and it shallowed considerably, whereas 33 was drilled at a minus 60 and steepened. So it actually cut quite a bit deeper than 37 did. So down deep to the north, we seem to be hitting a higher frequency of mineralized veins within the stock, and within the sedimentary post rocks, we see a much higher proportion of disseminated sulfides. So the strength of grade and the frequency of veining appears to be increasing to the north. And that's something that we similarly saw in 35 as well as we got to the northeast. So there is some really spectacular zones of massive bornite veining hosted in between the two zones of serriate texture disseminated mineralized intrusive, this new zone. And then down deep within the porphyry stock as well, we're still continuing to hit those sparsely distributed, but still, very much present sulfide veins. And the sulfide species, again, it's a lot of bornite and chalcocite. So it does look like, as a deep zone, to the north is a focus. We don't have a lot of information on deep within the porphyry stock or deep down in the sedimentary rocks down to the southeast. But there is a lot of broadly continuous, very strongly anomalous copper mineralization down there as well. So right now, it's looking like the north is going to be a bit of a deeper focus. But again, all of this is subject to change based on what we hit, right? When you start doing this more systematic drilling, once you start to understand what you're hitting, you can adjust and change the plan on the fly, kind of, exactly like we did towards the end of the 2024 season. So yeah, just to Tony's point, I mean, we're going to try and keep everybody who's following the story updated and knowing what we know. So when we make a decision like that, we keep everybody updated. The problem with doing that, like Tony said, is people kind of run wild with speculation. Oh, they found it. Why are they pivoting strategy? Why, so a bit of a double-edged sword there. But I think at the end of the day, people probably appreciate the communication, and we're going to try to do that as we go forward in 2025.
I feel like, American Eagle has a real opportunity in 2025 to be transparent with, regular updates. I mean, I'm not saying you guys have not been transparent. I think that you have, and that's a major strength of the company, but I think you can also set an example for other junior mining companies in 2025 with, updates every 4 weeks, maybe during the drill program. And you can also just tune out the peanut gallery. You guys know what you're doing. You're running this company. You know knack way better than anybody else, Neil. So just do the good work and keep your head down and don't listen to too much feedback from people who may not really understand what's happening. Before I have Tony wrap it up, I want to ask you, Neil, about the IP embayment zone in the southeast area. So, like on the drill plan map, you've got chalcopyrite, malachite, chalcopyrite. You got 4 stars there. So clearly, there's some copper oxides in outcrop there. There's some smoke, so to speak. What do we understand about that southeast area now? And maybe just bring a rig over there, this summer and drill some big step out holes, huh?
Well, yeah, that whole area is going to see a lot more systematic drilling. I'm really encouraged by what we hit in hole 9. I'm really encouraged by what we hit in hole 36, even though the grades weren't booming. It was very, very strongly anomalous. There's a lot of copper around, and the outcrop at surface is in mineralized intrusive, which is very good to see. We know where there's mineralized intrusive, there's very commonly at NAC, very good mineralization in the bounding rocks as well. So the limited outcrop exposure we do have there shows mineralization. And until we've had this latest round of much, much more robust funding, it was tough to justify the logistical and cost challenges of changing everything up to a heli-supported rig, getting a drill pad built, clearing the timber, going in without any certainty or any assurance that we can continue to drill. Part of the problem with doing those big step outs when you're not well funded is that if you miss, it can kind of kill that whole zone. And that's a big problem next specifically because we know that there is very tightly spaced zones of not great grade and then really, really great grade. So in a zone that we don't have a great handle on, you run the risk of missing on one hole, but drilling a second hole 50, 100 meters away could hit really, really well. And when you average that all out over an open pit bulk tonnage situation, it can still work out to be really economic, but you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you don't commit to properly exploring an area without the necessary funding. So it's a lot easier to justify those bigger step outs and more systematic drilling in that area this season and next season.
I think, but to add on to that, if people want to look at that map, one hole we're definitely going to go to, and we wanted to go there last year, but time was running out. The camp thing, kind of killed us a bit. We would have been drilling longer. We would have been drilling more in the north towards the end of the season. And look, Lake Babbie Nation just signed a deal with the West Fraser Mills. We're pretty confident we can get that whole area clear cut.
Yeah.
And if we can't, we're working with them right now. Canfor was going to do it, as we speak, on our property, 3 different blocks. And, they're either going to clear it this season where we can drive to it, or, we got the budget and we're going to fly a rig right to where hole 9 is and drill it in the opposite direction. Neil has his marching orders for that. So, people can look forward to that. I know Glenn Galata's on the phone right now. He's in my ear. He thinks he knows where this thing is hidden. He's coming to the office next week, but we got a lot of sniffs here. We think something's hiding underneath, but we just got to do what's best for our company. It's about, your cost of capital. So that's one of the reasons why we've been a little bit more hesitant to taking these massive step outs. It can A, kill a zone, and B, when we know the area is going to be clear cut and the mineralization is staying in the ground, you can always save it for the following year. So, we finally don't have to worry about raising money. And even in the last year, it's like, yeah, we got $7-8 million in the bank, but at what point do we do that raise and we're going to be left with no money at the end? You're always worried about that. And for the very first time, we have 2 years of drilling, which we get 30% money back. So you spend $10 million, the government writes you a check for $3 million, and probably 3 full years of drilling. So we're not as worried about our cost of capital. It's about hitting those big drill outs. And for us, it's about how can we get ourselves to where we want to be in 12 to 8 months and de-risk this thing and show it's big and kind of follow the blueprint of Great Bear. I don't really think a resource is that important. It doesn't show how big you are. It shows how small you are. And, NAC continues to surprise, and we drill spots that no one's ever drilled. We're coming up with mineralization. Now it's about tying it together and continue to show growth. And Neil, sorry, Rob, not to be the interviewer, but why don't we touch really quickly? I've got some pings while I'm on the phone. Let's talk really quick about the off season. I know you guys are modeling and doing all your work there, but I think people are interested about the geophysics. So let's just touch on that really quickly and what it's going to show the public and more importantly, us.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping to do a bit more of a detailed gradient magnetometer survey which is airborne this off season, and that can be mobilized pretty quickly. And then we're also looking at the viability for imaging deeper resistivity via CSAMT. We'll run a few pilot lines, see if we get a good response, see if it correlates with what we know in the near surface and the IP data that we have, and then go from there. So that's going to guide certainly some of the more further afield step outs. And yeah, it's just a matter of when we get the data, working that into our modeling and kind of bringing it all together. So those are the preliminary plans. Obviously, there's a lot of different methods out there, right? And so we're working pretty closely with South32 and Tech on what they would recommend and what they've done for geophysics, especially given the expanded budget we have now. So yeah, no options are fully off the table, and we're considering a lot of things, but preliminarily, these are what most likely is going to happen at this stage.
Well, that's a really good point, Neil. Like, people always ask us about Tech and South32. We are going to be really leveraging our partners and the brain trust there to kind of help us out along the way. Tech was a little bit more, laissez-faire. They wrote a smaller check. It was an investment. But believe me, South32 wrote $29 million. They wrote it for a reason, and they want their investment to pay off. So we are working very closely with them. There's upwards of 10 people we're working with there of all different skill sets. So we got a really good team there that we like working with. And, same with Tech. They're just great people, and they want to do the same thing we do. And, in the end, who knows who buys us, but if this thing is what we think it can be, there's enough room for 2 companies to also take you over. It's going to be big. It's going to have nice capex, and it's going to be a long-lived mine if we can prove it out. And then along the way, Alan Wilson's coming back for a 3rd season, which will be really helpful. He's just named the, head of the Economic Society of the World, or whatever that group's called. And then Steve Garwin, and I know Nate Smith's on the call. He's a big fan. Pushed us to Steve Garwin, so he's actually doing a 4-day study modeling to help us maybe see something we haven't seen. The problem with NAC, it's not analogous to a lot of these, BC Canadian properties. And, who knows, it might be similar to something that someone's seen in Papua New Guinea or Siberia. So the more smart people, experts in porphyries that look at it, maybe they see something that's analogous that can help us along the way. And that's why we bring in Alan Wilson and Steve Garwin and, maybe even Dick Silto someday if we're lucky to have him.
Tony, you're on my wavelength. You literally thought of my last 2 questions, and I didn't even have to tell you. If anybody has a final question for Tony or Neil, we'll take one question from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up for today. By the way, Tony will be presenting on my panel at the Metals Investor Forum tomorrow in Vancouver, Friday the 17th. I think it's like 3:30 in the afternoon, Vancouver time.
You go on at 3, Rob.
Yeah. Yes, you definitely want to tune in for my presentation because I'm gonna talk about some timely market moving content that may help you to make money or avoid losing money in the near future. Any question from the audience? Last chance.
That's something else,
Final
guys.
question for you, Tony, is if people sold their American Eagle shares this week and they said, I'll just buy back in April or May when they get closer to summer drilling, what would you say to them?
Look, every investor is different. Everyone has a different risk tolerance. Maybe someone has another high flying stock they want to put their money into. So even if, American Eagle goes up 100% or 50% since then, maybe they're holding on a stock that goes up 100%. I don't know, but all I know is I'm just looking at history. And, last year when we had no drilling, we went up 240%. People are obviously a little bit sore about the most recent news, which, we still think in the big scheme of things is really, really good. And it overshadowed Hole 31. So, I always just say, know the stock you own. Don't buy it because some pseudonym or someone else. Everyone's just selling their own book. Use the information. Know when you're in the junior industry, it's very risky. Expect that what you put into that stock, you're expecting to lose. But, along the way, you'll hit some really good, five baggers. Look no different than, GT Gold. GT Gold went from 30 cents to $2 back and forth probably 2 or 3 times. But, I think moving forward, we're building upon our story here. We got $37 million. We're going to be drilling. So now people aren't going to be really focusing on, what we didn't hit that they expected, more about what our plan is and what we're going to drill. And we'll be coming out with news in probably 2 or 3 weeks, highlighting our exploration plan, hopefully coming out with more information from the findings of Alan Wilson, Steve Garwin. And also, we're doing roundup. Come see that core for yourself. Come to PDAC. We're showing our core there. So be heavy on the marketing. And before you know it, the birds going to be chirping. It's going to be spring. We'll be drilling again.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony and Neil. I'll see you tomorrow, Tony. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I'll have this up on my YouTube channel over the weekend. Cheers.